There you go. Thank you so much. Okay, Colin, it's all yours. Off you go.
Thank you. Okay, so I should now hopefully be sharing
Yeah,
the presentation slide.
Yeah, great picture. Yeah, we got it.
Great, thank you. So today I'd like to talk to you about managing mental ill health in the workplace. Although this is also relevant outside of the workplace, so you could use a lot of what I'm going to say and discuss in your personal life, your family life. And we all have mental health. There is no health without mental health. And my objective today is to raise a bit of awareness and hopefully make you view mental health maybe slightly differently. So the three main takeaways from this presentation will be understanding which of four broad categories your employees or your team members fall into, or that could be your friends or your family or yourself. And I've got to remember that this is a person we're talking about, and this will determine the next steps in how you manage the situation. We'll be looking at creating an agreed support plan, how to support that person experiencing mental ill health, and how to support your existing business needs and goals. And then finally, managing the rest of the team. What is the impact on everybody else, and how do you manage them? I'm probably going to spend most of the time describing the first point, because I think that's all about raising awareness and noticing what's going on for people. And I think that's really important. The second 2 points are actually probably quite straightforward. But before we go too far into the subject, let's just consider what is mental health. Now, there are many definitions, but here's one. So mental health influences how we think and feel about ourselves and others, and how we interpret events. It affects our capacity to learn, to communicate, and to form, sustain, and end relationships. It also influences our ability to cope with change, transition, and life events, such as having a baby, going to prison, or experiencing bereavement. So to put that into other words, our mental health affects how we think, how we feel, and how we behave, how we view ourselves and the other people around us, and the perception of the world around us. Now, we're all unique individuals. We all interpret our thoughts and feelings and our place in the world differently, and it depends on a lot of factors. I'm not going to go into those factors today, but let's just remember the fact that we're all unique individuals. Mental health is not one size fits all. What works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another person, and what causes stress or distress for one doesn't necessarily cause stress for another. And mental health problems don't discriminate. They don't respect social status. They don't respect wealth. And to put that into a little bit of context, here's some statistics. I like a good statistic. Now, I appreciate that you can make statistics say whatever you want. So I've pulled a couple of different sources together just to make my point. So according to the NHS, 25% of people will experience some form of mental health issue in any given year. And I believe that statistics is pre-pandemic, so it might be 1 in 3 now, we don't know. The Royal College of Psychiatrists state that about 17% of working age adults display symptoms of mental health problems, but are not necessarily severe enough for an official diagnosis. And the Department of Health states that a further 17% do have a diagnosable condition at any given point in time. So my point being that somewhere in the region of 20 to 25% of the population are experiencing mental health challenges at any given point in time. Now, that's a lot of people, and it's very likely and possible that you will be meeting, interacting, and working with some of these people. And I strongly believe that having an awareness of mental health is really important for all of us. And if we consider this range that I've put on the screen, so it goes from diagnosis over to no diagnosis, we could consider, can we plot people on this line? I'm doing it as a graph because not only do I love statistics, I love graphs as well. So on the left-hand side, we could plot people experiencing and having been diagnosed with things like depression, anxiety, eating disorders, bipolar, I'm not going to list all the possible diagnoses. And on the right-hand side is no diagnosis. But when we think of those statistics, that some people will have symptoms that aren't severe enough to have a diagnosis, like where do they go on the line? So are they here or somewhere in the middle? You know, I could be experiencing a mental health disorder, but just haven't received a diagnosis. You know, where do I go in the line? Am I further to the left? So there's no scale on this line. There's no absolutes, and you can't really have a metric to rank the severity of mental illness along the line. And when we talk about diagnoses, we're talking in a medical language. I'm not qualified to diagnose someone. I can't place somebody at that end of the line. Unless someone were to tell me they have a diagnosis, you know, you shouldn't make assumptions. I couldn't place them there. I can only put everybody basically on the right-hand side. So this scale of just looking at diagnosis or no diagnosis is a bit binary, and it isn't really adequate to help us manage mental ill health. And there's a general agreement that mental health is more than an absence of mental illness. And we should consider well-being. And well-being is a combination of positive feelings and positive effects, so life satisfaction, happiness, and positive functioning. So being engaged, having a sense of meaning, social well-being, having a sense of purpose. So this linear model isn't really sufficient. So we add another axis for well-being, which uses more social language, and that's language that we're all familiar with. You know, we all have good days or bad days. We can relate to this vertical axis much more. And this gives us a more holistic approach. And it also provides us with these 4 quadrants, which are our 4 broad categories. So the first category in the top right is with no diagnosis and good mental well-being. The second would be no diagnosis and poor mental health. Now, I mentioned you could experience the symptoms of, say, depression, but have not received a formal diagnosis. So that's maybe where you'd be in this quadrant. Now, you might just be having a bad day. So you could be down in that quadrant for a day, and then you go back up to having good mental health the next day. But when someone's in this quadrant, we need to monitor the situation. If their low mood becomes prolonged, say more than 2 weeks, there's a risk that they may be experiencing clinical depression, for example, and then they could move into this third category, which is having a diagnosis and having low mental health. And a formal diagnosis and experiencing the symptoms, a person here will very likely have difficulty coping even with the everyday normal stresses of day-to-day life. But it is possible to be in this fourth category, which is having a formal diagnosis, but it's coping, but you're coping with it, you're leading a productive and fruitful life. So for example, someone who experiences a mental diagnosis, but they've developed good coping strategies, you know, so they're able to function and be productive within their community. So these are the 4 categories. You can have a think about where you sit on the diagram today. I do hope it's in the top right. But remember, there's no absolutes here, and we can all move around the diagram. Mental health is very fluid, changes on a day-by-day or even a moment-by-moment basis. It is possible and likely that someone on the left-hand side with a diagnosis can recover and move back to the right-hand side. And that diagnosis is no longer valid. So a diagnosis is not necessarily for life or for forever. And it doesn't matter what quadrant someone is in, we can still have a conversation and we can apply like notice, inquire, support. And you definitely want to have that conversation if you think someone might be moving to the lower half of the diagram. I talked about notice, inquire, support in my last talk, so I won't go into great detail here, but in summary, we're noticing changes in thinking, feeling, and behavior. We're inquiring about what we've noticed. So I noticed X, what's going on for you? Remember, you can't cause harm by asking questions. And then support, this is where we start to think about creating a plan, which includes understanding and empathizing. And I want to explore that a little bit more further, especially the empathy part, before moving on to the support planning. So to consider empathy, I want you to put yourself into this little story. So imagine this. You've taken some time off from work due to a physical health condition. It's the first time you've had this, and it's serious enough to require some time in hospital. Perhaps you've got appendicitis or gallstones or broken your leg, but you're in a lot of pain and you need to have a minor operation. The doctors are telling you that treatment options are good and you'll be able to recover. The problem might flare up again from time to time, but you'll find ways of managing this. While you're in hospital, nobody sends you flowers. Nobody sends you a get well card. Nobody visits. When you get home, your family complain that you're spending too much time in bed. They think that you're not really pulling your weight. It's like you're not really trying, is what they're telling you. When you're feeling a little bit better, you try to use the time that you're off sick from work to catch up with a friend. They're usually really great at getting back to you and usually keen to make time for you, but it feels like they're making a lot of excuses, like they don't seem to want to meet up. And when you ask them why, they just send you a WhatsApp message. It's just been a bit weird with you lately. Now, you left work while a big project was running. When you come back, you accidentally overhear two colleagues who are talking in the next room. I know they weren't very well, but they could have made a bit more of an effort to stick around. Yeah, they've really let the team down. Then you meet up with your line manager who says, I didn't want to overload you, so I've given all your responsibilities to one of your colleagues. But you feel perfectly capable and happy to do your usual job. Like all you really wanted was to be brought up to speed with everything that you missed while you were off. Now, if you take a moment to consider, how would you feel if this had really happened to you? Or to someone that you loved? Would you feel that you or they had been treated fairly? Like they were still part of the team? How might that affect your personal and professional relationships? And how might you react or interact with people in the future? And then the next time you were ill, would you tell anyone? Would you feel differently if this scenario was about mental health rather than physical health? What could the people in this scenario have done differently to help? I think having better communication and an agreed plan would have been beneficial. So now if we imagine that this person has sought professional help and maybe comes back to work with a diagnosis or a better understanding of what they're experiencing, the business still needs to function. Creating an action plan, an agreed way of working, which is what I've got on the screen. Okay, it's an empty table, but more than that, it's a conversation. This support plan can be applied regardless of the quadrant somebody is in, but it's more likely to be useful when somebody is in the lower half of the table, of the diagram, but we don't want to wait until they're there to have this conversation. We should have this conversation as early as possible. So we want to look at the things from the employee's perspective, but what do they believe are the main risks and issues? We also need to look at what the business's perspective is and what are the resulting issues or risk to the business and what's the impact on the business. Now, under the Equality Act of 2010, chronic mental ill health is classified as a disability, which is a protected characteristic. And under the Health and Safety Act, a business should do what is reasonably practicable to maintain the well-being of employees to meet its duty of care. So we want to look to make reasonable adjustments for the person, but bear in mind the business still needs to run. And the best solution here is to empower the person to come up with solutions that can be agreed and work both for that person and for the business. And remembering that these need to be reasonable adjustments, so we need to guide the conversation away from what could be considered unreasonable for the company. So it's a very simple example. We've got, I don't know if you can read that, but I've sort of put under the employees' concerns, so they might have a panic attack in a crowded room. And the issues affecting them is that they can't cope with the large team meeting. When the next column, the manager's concern and the impact for the manager is that this person needs to be at that meeting because they need to have input into it. Them not being at the meeting is going to cause delays in decisions, it's going to cause delays in projects, it's going to delay sales. So that's unacceptable for the company. And then so you want to have a bit of a brainstorming session together. You know, what solutions could we come up with? So is it a telephone conference? Do we have a remote dial-in, etc.? You know, again, we're looking for reasonable and practicable solutions here. And then we write down what's agreed. So in this case, we're saying this employee can dial into that meeting by Zoom. So they're in the comfort of their own home, the risk of the panic attacks mitigated, but they're also at the meeting. And then you need to have a review date, say review at the end of the month. How is this working out? Yes or no? You have this signed and agreed. So the business can empathize with the employee, and the employee can empathize with the business needs as well. So now we've got this agreed way of working that satisfies the individual and it satisfies the business tasks that need to be done. Who else is affected? Well, the rest of the team. Internally and possibly externally, we want to ensure that everyone is pulling in the same direction. So be aware that the effect of one employee's mental health could have on the rest of the team. And like in the story example, we don't want teammates gossiping or rumors to spread. So the team may react to the person's particular symptoms or behavior while they're unwell. They may react to an increased workload as a result of the person not being well enough to work. And they may react to any reasonable adjustments that have been made for that employee. Why do they get to dial in and I have to be there in person? That doesn't sound fair. Oops, I've gone too far. So in some of these instances, it would be advisable to just be as honest and open with the team as confidentiality issues allow. Identify the working conditions that may have an adverse effect on well-being and change them where necessary. Create an environment where staff can air their concerns openly. This helps prevent that gossiping and the rumor mill starting. It prevents resentment towards the member of staff who is experiencing the mental ill health. And treat all staff fairly in order to sustain their engagement. So for example, if you've offered that Zoom call or you've offered flexible working hours as a reasonable adjustment for one member of staff, it may be appropriate to offer the same to all members of staff. The well-being of the whole team is paramount, and employees who feel stable and supported, whatever their mental or physical health, will be more engaged, loyal, and productive. And I think the key things here are honesty and fairness. Also, sharing positive, value-adding experiences reduces vulnerability, and it reduces the risk of stress and the feelings of overwhelm that can move us all into that lower portion of the diagram. I encourage you all to talk about positive experiences in your life and share them with your colleagues, with your friends, with your family. You might inspire someone and you might be helping them at the same time. And when you've looked after the individual, you've made sure the business tasks are protected and the team are happy and understanding. Don't forget about yourself. Like, you've got to remember to look after your own self-care and remember to make time for your own positive, value-adding experiences too. So we've looked at the holistic model, the 4 quadrants that we all sit in. We've looked at creating an agreed support plan, like how it's a conversation that empowers the person to come up with solutions and it protects the business requirements. And we've looked at the fact that honesty and fairness are the key to managing the rest of the team, while never forgetting to look after yourself. So that's me. Thank you. It's been a real brief overview, but I hope it has been interesting and possibly useful for you. So thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Can you just free the screen, please?
I can certainly try.